Our very special guest today, Vedic astrologer Ryan Kurczak, helps others learn to live a natural and spontaneous life contentedly. This is accomplished by clearing away false notions of reality and what we really are to find existence in truth. Preconceptions of what it means to be fully human and self-realized is as easy or as hard, Ryan says, as we make it. Living as fullness of the essence of being, or sentience, there is freedom to move gracefully and dispassionately as the infinite. That's beautiful, Ryan. Ryan Kurczak graduated from Fairmont State University in 2000 with a bachelor's degree in psychology and minor in philosophy. After college, he completed training with the American and European Institutes of Vedic Studies in the subjects of Ayurveda and Jyotish. Ryan was ordained by Roy Eugene Davis, a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. Ryan is owner-operator of Holistic Health Solutions, LLC, a business dedicated to personal and group stress management education and the exploration and application of Vedic astrology. So, Ryan, you're going to be a guest speaker at the upcoming Wonderful Gathering as well. What do you think you might want to talk about there?
Well, my goal talking there would be to go into a little bit more of practices like meditation and certain things that we can do to help clear away some of the confusion in our consciousness to be in that present that we're all, I guess, shooting for in one way or another.
Well, what is the scope of your interests and your offerings? There's so much stuff you're involved with, and you've studied so much. What are you passionate about, and how does it play out for you?
Right. Well, mainly as work, I do Vedic astrology, and my goal there is really to help people get a sense of what they're dealing with in this incarnation, give them a little more self-knowledge, what their potentials are, what their weaknesses are. That way they can move forward, kind of like with a roadmap of their life. And that works out pretty well. However, I'm actually a yogi or a meditator first, so my passion is to help people transcend that as best they can. So working with it while they're in it, and then transcending it. So I also teach some meditation classes and workshops around town to that end. So those are my two main goals and my two main directions in life.
So when you say help them transcend it, you mean their story? Exactly.
Yep, that's exactly right. Because that's, from the astrological perspective, that's all we're talking about. Just the story, just the tendencies, behaviors, and karmic influences, which we can all go beyond.
Well, this has been an interesting week for me. A couple of things have happened. One was that I think I may finally have had my tendency to hold spiritual teachers up to a higher standard. That's been dissolved away. I was ignorant about that, and so that was good. And then also this connection between sexual intimacy and love that's been kind of an illusory connection for me is something that I think I've gone to a deeper place with. And your appearance on the program is another opportunity for me, because I have to say I have a bias against practices because my teachers found them unnecessary. And while I know for a fact that they're helpful,
right.
I also know that they're not the direct path. And I find you an interesting guy because you seem interested in not only the direct path, you seem to be aware of the direct path of sort of self-inquiry into the I thought, but then also you're extremely skilled in this, what I would call kind of secondary tool set. So where do you come down on all of that?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because that's one of the reasons I was very much interested in being on the program, because I know there is this sort of dichotomy between just be there now, and also, people who practice arduous meditation, these sorts of things. So where I come down on it is basically, we're all at some different degree, and just like Ramana Maharshi, he would always recommend mantra practice or meditation for people who needed that. And so to tell someone this is all the infinite consciousness and this is all there is and it's all you, it's not real helpful a lot of times. Mm-hmm. But if you can get them to sit down and be still and be quiet, what I found is that really helps give them the space or the openness to get a direct glimpse of that practice. And so, Vedic astrology is one of the Vedas, which is right along with yoga and Ayurveda. And the whole idea being that we're trying to get more self-knowledge. And just like in Ayurveda, the natural healthcare system of India, there are different doshas, different constitutions for different individuals, and so we treat different people in different ways. And so it's the same thing with spiritual practice or non-dualism or being. We need to see where is the person in regards to their, and these are just words, of course, in regards to their clarity or how thin is that veil of ignorance, if we want to use that term, and we kind of prescribe practices in that way. So I see it more in regards to where are they at. If they are caught up in inertia, if they're caught up in their mind and their story, the first thing we might need to do is tell them, look, sit down and meditate once a day for 20 minutes. If they've done that for years and years and years and they're still frustrated, not getting where they need to be, then we need to say, well, if you like meditating for your health and for your well-being, great, but maybe just try sitting there and being in the moment, and that can be enough. So it really depends on where they are on the spectrum from my perspective.
That makes perfect sense. But because I'm stuck a little bit, I want to dive even deeper into it, because it's clearly true. Okay, I don't work on my spiritual practice. I was fortunate because I had the kind of spontaneous, powerful awakening that some people, I guess, would like to have and hasn't happened, maybe. Okay, but I naturally spend much of my day with my attention turned inward because it's pleasing to me, and that's a newfound thing, that putting my attention on my attention is pleasing. But nevertheless, had that not been the case, if that didn't just happen of its own volition without any effort by me, I wouldn't have been motivated to put my attention on my attention. Can you motivate someone to put their attention on attention, to turn their attention inward if it doesn't come naturally? And I'm wondering, is helping someone with practices effective in getting them to put their attention on attention itself during the day just for the joy of that?
Right. That is probably one of the timeless questions. Because, I'm sure you have, if you've gone to possibly seminars or met with people who've been meditating or doing their practices for years, and they don't really seem a whole lot different. It's true what you say, that it's really beneficial when putting your attention within, when that becomes enjoyable. And, a lot of people, when they get started on the path in some way or other, if we want to call it a path, they're doing it because they're suffering in some way. Either they want to end some pain, they want some more knowledge, they want to heal, whatever it might be, and that sort of starts them going. But can we just motivate them to say, enjoy the beingness, enjoy the presence? I'm not so sure. I think in time it happens naturally, as it will happen with all of us one way or the other. But you're right, there does come a point where just that idea of being internalized, being that presence, being that being is just so much more fun, more enjoyable, more peaceful than anything you can imagine in the world. And I don't know that we can inspire that. However, for example, in the book Vasista's Yoga, which is a non-dual text from India, one of the prime ways of encouraging the awakening is to, they say, spend time with, quote, holy people or realized people. And that's not because they have anything interesting to say, although they might, because they're just personalities on one level. But what you're doing is you're spending time with that state of consciousness, clarity that they represent, and that rubs off on you, just like if you spend time with negative people, oftentimes for most folks, it rubs off on them. So what we're doing is we're bringing ourselves into a field of awareness that someone else is established in, and then we can tune into that, and then we see, this is why they like it so much. And that is sort of a subtle motivation, but it really does take a bit of clarity that's already there for either the student or the person to pick up on that. So it is a tricky question, and one that I don't quite have the exact answer for right now.
Well, that's fine. And we're going to I would like to get into some of what you do, like maybe even have you lead us in a meditative exercise or some of those things that you actually do in a bit. But I want to keep boring in here. Okay.
Nope. Go for it.
All right. Now, yoga and meditation, it does seem to me, are definitely ways to move beyond the I thought. There's no question about that. And so I think that they're useful and wonderful, and I understand why people want to take them up. And now Ramana and my own teachers, and many of the guests have appeared on our show, they say that it's fine if you want to meditate and what have you, but it's not necessary. But if you're called to it in a natural way, then go ahead. Here's my question. The realized beings, if you will, in the know, all seem to point to the fact that the best tool in the shed for living the kind of life that I mentioned earlier in my intro to you, of a natural and spontaneous life, a contented life like that, the best tool in the shed for that is the direct approach of taking the mind needle and going in and plucking out the thorn of the eye thought, the illusion of a separate self. That's like the direct method. And so my question is, and so for myself, I personally, and I know this is just a personal thing, I don't mess around with the other tools in the shed when I've got the best one right there at hand. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's just me. But my question is, when you dispense your services to people, are you clear and insistent in helping them realize that is the most effective tool to root out that I thought, or are you one who would advocate the meditative practices as being a kind of initial necessary precursor to that rooting out of the I thought?
Right. Yeah, so when I work with people, whether it's in a group setting or even interpersonally, I'm always saying, going back to the source, realizing what you are, being what you are, these sorts of things. So I let that be known that is the case. And then if you pay attention as you're talking with someone or working with a group, you kind of see, do they get that? Or, do they need a little bit more calming down of the mind, a little more direct experience? And it's kind of funny to say direct experience, because if everything is I and everything is this wholeness of life, everything is one thing, well then even the state of what we might call, quote, negative consciousness is the same thing. So it's all fine and dandy. But so basically, yeah, I do bring that up. But then what I do is I see, well, where are they, again, on the spectrum? And one of the ways I've really been able to compare it to, because I was in college once and I dealt with a lot of fun partying individuals and being one myself, I realized that a lot of people are, in a sense, drunk or inebriated or so caught up in illusion or caught up in this false sense of self that what we kind of need to do is sober them up a little bit. And so, my sense is I sort of tune in and see, well, where are they? And just, can I talk to them directly? Can I say, look, this is it. Let's just sit here, be quiet, and that's it. If so, fine. That's lovely. I love it. It's wonderful. But if I say that, and it's just, you can tell the mind's still going, and you can tell it's not really getting to speaking to them directly, then I would recommend, other practices in accordance with them. And sometimes that might not be meditation. Sometimes that might be just doing something to improve their health. Because if their health is shot, oftentimes it's really harder for them to not be frustrated and turn within in that way. So again, there's this spectrum that I see that needs to be worked with. And my goal really is to move them from sort of what I would call the inebriated state into that place where they can just enjoy what they're doing. And that could even be with music or something of that nature, because even music or dance, it's got the same idea as meditation. You're not doing it to get anywhere. You don't, as Alan Watts would say, you don't listen to a song to get to the end of it, and you don't dance to get to the last step. So if we can sort of bring that space of just being in that process, being in the way consciousness is right now, that's the best bet. But it truly depends, from what I've seen, kind of got to assess where they are and how much do they grasp immediately? Where are they in that state? That's the main factor that needs to be assessed. But I love just sitting with people and talking about the I and being the fullness of consciousness, if that's possible. But oftentimes hasn't had quite the effect that it would otherwise optimistically have, if it would just work to say that all the time.
Okay. Do you mind me asking these sorts of questions? Kind of, it's helping, getting at my own ignorance. Do you mind doing that?
Oh, yeah, sure, okay. Whatever.
All right. I got a couple more, because I watched one of your videos, and you said that one of the points of meditation and the practices that you teach is that eventually a person gets to the point where they can allow life itself to be the teacher, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
why not let life itself be the teacher right now? Like, why not, instead of, for example, helping people to calm their mind and sort of, do all the things that are done in the practices, why not say to them, hey, stop disregarding all of the signs and all of the information that's present right here in the now. Make the now your God, and no matter what it presents, whether it's chaos or unhappiness or whatever, let that be your guide right now and make that their primary mission in life right now.
Yeah, that's, my thought about that, because that's really a great idea. And, a lot of teachers do propose that. And, again, this is where I'm sort of on the fence, because on one hand, I love, Eckhart Tolle, and I love Ramana Maharshi. These are all very inspirational people and teachings for me. And just reading some of their works and listening to even Eckhart Tolle talk, I've had some quite amazing awakening experiences. But, what it all boils down to, which is sort of the interesting part of the whole crux of this non-dualism, spirituality, meditate, don't meditate thing, is it really comes down to what does a person enjoy. And I remember when I was just a kid, just a little kid, and I would hear my parents talking about their friends or complaining about something that they were doing, and, the difficulties they would experience because of what they were doing. And for some reason in my mind, it always popped up. I said, well, they must enjoy it. I mean, why would you keep doing this and causing that situation unless you enjoyed it? Mm-hmm. And so, that got me in a lot of trouble when I would say it. But as the years went by, I realized that, if this is all the infinite consciousness, which it is, and we all have these stories, and so it's the infinite consciousness playing this game with itself. And so this idea of needing a teacher or having to do these certain things, it's because, in a sense, that portion, that aspect of this infinite consciousness enjoys that on some level. Yeah. And that's why there are so many people that do have, spontaneous awakening experiences, because that's what they enjoy. That's what they want, is as the wholeness of life, interacting with itself. And so what it all boils down to, really, in my mind, and I guess experience, is that it's all really okay. And we're all playing a game, and we're all pretending that we don't know what we are, and we're all, you don't turn on the TV or read a book when there's no protagonist or antagonist. There has to be some sort of tension to get into it for most people. And so it's the same kind of thing. Life has that thing, like this conversation. You have your point of view as the infinite consciousness. I have mine. We're both the infinite consciousness, so it doesn't really matter. But it gives us this capacity to have this radio show, and then for people to listen. And so it's all, in a sense, entertainment in my mind. It just depends on how you want to be entertained.
I couldn't agree with you more. Hey, how do I pronounce your last name?
Kurczak.
Kurczak, okay. You're listening to Conversations with Avant-Garde Sages, and our very special guest today, Ryan Kurczak, is here, Vedic astrologer and spiritual teacher. And if you would like to comment or question, you can do so by emailing me at zortacular@gmail.com, and I'll get your question or comment on the air. It's ZORTACULAR, zortacular@gmail.com. All right, I'm almost through peppering you with these questions. Okay, Ryan? Okay.
No problem. I enjoy it.
All right. One of the things that I've observed as being true, and I could be wrong, so I want you to disabuse me of my ignorance here, is that the practices are, to some degree, from my point of view, a have your cake and eat it too kind of philosophy, because what they promise is that our mental states, if we calm the mind and we become more peaceful and serene and positive, will necessarily attract to us external circumstances that reflect that internal reality. Okay? And it's absolutely true that, and you were mentioning it in one of your videos where you said when you sit around all day and you didn't have your clients and you worried about it and you had a kind of scarcity mentality, nobody picked up the phone and called you. And then when you internally came around to a much more optimistic outlook, all of a sudden the phone starts ringing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but the thing is, it's like, I feel like that's a have your cake and eat it too philosophy, because if you serve someone's motivation to enhance their external circumstances to meet an internal desire, you're ultimately doing them a kind of disservice, because you're suggesting their happiness is externality driven. So, right. For example, this whole exercise is not about thinking good thoughts and then good things happening, which they will. It's being happy regardless of what happens externally. Is that not right?
Right.
So, for me, there's almost an inner conflict there in the practice, because it's about creating mental conditions and a state of mind that will attract the same externally, but that's still one step removed from the peace that derives from an identification with something that's already present.
Right.
And so, I don't know, I just, again, these are the little things I get hung up on, and then I have a tendency to want to sort of dismiss practices and overlook the value, you know?
Right.
Yeah, so.
Well, the mind is what gets us caught up in those ideas, and obviously because it's the mind. But really, that's something that I dealt with for a long time, because practicing Kriya Yoga, which is very much said that you sit down, you meditate, and you practice in a certain way, and you live your life in a certain way, and that helps to clear out your karma so that you can get direct experience of what is, and that's what they say. And then the other side of the coin, with Ramana Maharshi's work and whatnot, he's basically surrender. If there's a problem, find out what experiences that problem, turn into the I that experiences it, and see if that is real. And in that way, you transcend. And what I found is that, number one, I remember talking with Roy Eugene Davis one time doing one of our visits, and as I was sitting there in meditation and doing these practices, I would always come to this point where I would realize, well, this is it. I mean, whether I had spectacular experiences, whether I was just sitting there, whether I heard the birds, whether, the person next door was yelling at their spouse, that this was just it. This was all there is. And I said to him, so it seems to me that this is it. And he just looked around the room and said, yep, I think this is pretty much it. And from there, I also had another conversation with him. I think he's 82 or 83 now. We were having lunch at the retreat center, and he was talking about people retiring. He said, I don't understand why people want to retire. He said, what are they going to do with their time? And he's still working, still writing, still traveling. He says, you're always going to be somewhere in the infinite, or you're always the infinite, so you got to be doing something if you want with your time. And when he said that, it occurred to me that really the whole point of this idea of attracting things and whatnot is, number one, if you realize that you're the infinite, fine, that's it. But if you realize you're the infinite, well, why not do something fun?
Right on.
And so if you want to have a good business, get into that space where you'll attract that good business. The problem, you're right, comes when we identify too much with the actual experiences and say that that is our happiness, rather than just saying that's what we want to experience. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes a process of knowing what you are, and then once you know what you are, deciding, well, what do I need to do, whether it's going out and getting a job, or changing my mental states, or being a nicer person, or sitting down in meditation to develop my nervous system. What do I need to do to experience it, and realize that it is the infinite consciousness, again, that wants to do that. So it doesn't become the source of your happiness, it's just what you want to do.
Right on.
Yeah, so that's my take on it, and that's been my experience, with it.
I get it.
Yeah. So everything's fine.
I wanted to ask you, because I sense you're a very kind man and a caring person. Do you have a desire to be helpful to other people? And I asked that question, and I'll tell you that I've let that go because I felt it was a trap. Like to actually create a plan, if you will, for helping other people has gotten me into the most trouble of my life. Every big crash and burn that I've ever had has come on the heels of me making a plan to help someone else. So right now, the only time I am of assistance to anyone is when they show up right in my wheelhouse. They're needing of my assistance. They've got the right attitude. And then my innate sense of caring is triggered and I go ahead and help. But right. Apart from that, I've found that the universe seems to want to rid me of that tendency because it's not actually helpful to anybody. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I guess it depends, and to speak to your first thing, being a caring person, I was not always that way.
You were a party animal there at college or something? What were you like? What were you like? Were you a bad boy or what?
Oh, I was just kind of critical and cynical and mean and those sorts of things growing up. So, so I had to learn to get over that. But anyway, so yeah, the helping thing, I guess my idea when I was sort of transitioning from the mean self to the whatever I am now, there was this sense of righteousness in regards to, I would do these things and have these experiences and this realization, understanding. I would want people to do this because it's so good for you. And that, you're right, at least from my perspective, wasn't helpful at all. And, I found that really the things I like talking about, like on my YouTube videos and when I do talks and even when I do, personal sessions with people, I had to realize that I wasn't doing that because I wanted to help them. I was doing that because I just enjoyed it. I enjoy talking about books like The Siesta Yoga and Living a Natural and Spontaneous Life Contentedly. I love talking about what we're talking about on the phone just as much as I like picking up my guitar and playing some Led Zeppelin. It's the same feeling of love. I do it because it's great and it's fun, for me as this expression of the infinite. But you're right. Anytime I would try to help someone, and it wasn't appropriate or they weren't asking or they weren't interested, that was always a time where I sort of got bitten on the behind,
yeah.
Which was no good.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about kindness and toughness, if you will. One of the precepts of living the truth is to just be natural, to be who you are. And I find that I'm not as sort of naturally nice and kind and warm and fuzzy as most of the people that I interview, like you.
Right.
And I look at guys like Nisargadatta, who there would be people that would show up on his doorstep and he'd say, just get out, He wasn't always nice.
Yeah.
And so, when nothing turns me on more, and there's very little that I do more of than basically walk around, basically recognizing the divinity of everyone that I meet. I mean, I do it all day long. If I'm in the grocery store, I do it with a checkout counter person. If I'm at a party, that's all I want to talk about, because I feel that's just the ultimate joy, is the realization of what we already are. But when I do that, though, I kind of look at the person and I go at them with the presumption that they are not a separate person,
Right.
I don't even go there. I don't coddle them in the idea that they're separate and sort of start with where they are and sort of, kind of work with them or whatever. I just cut to the chase and say, you're not a separate person. That's a lie. This is who you actually are,
Yeah.
And so my question to you is, you're like a kind practitioner. You're very kind to people, and you sort of help them, and you sort of work with them where they are, and that's your dharma, and it's good. But I wonder, from my perspective of my dharma is sort of more brusque. I wonder, is the willingness to work with someone from where they are, if it's identified with being a separate person, is that giving strength to the idea of their separateness? I mean, you could go right at them with a kind of unforgiving assumption of their oneness, and just not broach any crap. To the contrary. I mean, so I kind of look sometimes at people like you that are so kind and caring, and I go, why don't you just slap them around a little bit? I mean, where do you come down on that?
I'm sorry I've given you the wrong idea about me. No, I'm very much for it to a degree, but again, it's to the degree of it's to the degree of knowing and sort of the appropriateness of the moment, because that's the other big thing about yoga or just even this whole non-dualism now thing. It's to be appropriate to the moment. And so, I mentioned the me being mean and whatnot. When I first got involved in all this, I had no patience for anyone. If you didn't just get it, that was tough, and get out of here. So I had that, and so I know what it's like, and I still have that to a degree. For example, when I was a minister at one of the Center for Spiritual Awareness Centers, or the Center for Spiritual Awareness Center here in Asheville, And there was this one person who was always bugging me with questions. Nice guy, good friend. But like he was always thinking about things, and what about this teacher, and what about that teacher, and so on. And even though I was in this tradition, I didn't really care too much about it. And finally, I was thinking, what do I do? And he came up and he said, what about this? And I said to him, I don't care. It doesn't matter. I said, just forget about it. Just, do your thing and don't worry about what all these other people say. And so I think there's a time and a place for the brusqueness and for the smacking around and that sort of thing. Just for my own development, I personally, this incarnation wants to be a little bit nicer than has the potential for. So I guess it's part of my own practice to work on this, this character trait that you're describing, because it is more natural for me to be like what you're talking about, and I can do that. It's just that, it hasn't, it hasn't worked for me in the past.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I guess inevitably the work is done in the area where we're weak. I mean, I have no problem being direct and brusque. So I need to feel into where people are at and work there more. You could be a little more brusque. I mean, there's always some area where we're underdeveloped. I don't know. Okay.
Right.
Now, you said in one of your videos, I didn't look at tons of them because I felt like I could understand where you were coming from, and I wanted to spend most of this rest of this program. I want to learn more about your offerings directly. Like I want to learn more about Vedic astrology, for example. I don't know anything about it, but I got one last prepared question for you here. Okay.
Yeah.
In one of your videos, you said it's fine to head for enlightenment. You said that. Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't want to hold you to anything because that was a 30-minute talk you were giving, and you were just being spontaneous, but it is fine to head for enlightenment, but if you recognize that what that means is basically death in life, like you're going to crash. Okay. I mean, you're not going to, I think that somehow, even though the vast majority of people who are on a spiritual path are able to grasp it intellectually, it seems to me that most people, probably the majority of people that would come to a meditation thing, don't seem to get that enlightenment is not something that somebody becomes. Somebody doesn't become enlightened. It's the loss of themselves as a separate person that represents enlightenment. So there's no sort of becoming enlightened. And it's a very usually painful experience getting to that place, because you have to let go of every cherished notion you ever had, including the sense of yourself and your attachment to your story, your material well-being and everything. It's a complete free fall. I mean, it's not pleasant to walk to the edge of a cliff and then drop off backwards into the air. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And that's what the promise of enlightenment is. Would you like to be in the perpetual state of falling backwards off of a cliff and not knowing when you're going to hit the ground?
Right.
That's the promise of enlightenment. And I don't think that very many people that are sitting in the yoga position get that.
Right. Yeah, it's enlightenment is just a word, and that's the thing to always remember. And that is one of the reasons I just love at least Vasishtha's yoga, because even though it does have practices and it is a non-dual text, it breaks it right down. It says, enlightenment is just a word, and it says that what is the infinite consciousness, and that's what we're aiming for, if we're aiming for anything, I guess. But again, the difficulty is that most people, you're right, think that enlightenment is like a glorified human state,
right?
Where everything works out beautifully and perfectly all the time, and they have everything that their ego wants and whatnot. And you're right, it's not true. Enlightenment is this whole sense, again, it being a word, that, at least from my perspective and from my experience, it's knowing what you are. And, once you know what you are, then no matter what's going on, whether you're dreaming, whether you're interacting with someone, whether you're playing music, doing your work, whatever it might be, if you know what you are, then that is the state of knowing. And that still has a hint of mind to it, because it's still knowing something. And as that kind of leaves and as that fades away, then this whole idea of the self, the experience, the experiencer, everything is all one thing. And that's beyond the mind. That's a state that that you can't talk about. We can try, but it's not something that you can really mentalize. It's just what is. And it is scary because, again, if you're attached to a glorified human state, this is probably why so many people falter, at least in regards to the path and the practice side of things, because they get so far, and then they start to realize the truth. And they're like, holy, and they back off, and they back off. And, a story about that, when Mr. Davis was with Yogananda, Yogananda wrote the book Autobiography of a Yogi, and in that book there's a number of stories of saints and sages in India that had wonderful experiences. And when Roy was walking with Yogananda one time, he said he never went to him with questions, which I understand. He just wanted to be in his presence. But then Yogananda said, well, do you have any? And one popped into his mind. He said, yeah, how many of the saints and sages in your book are fully, completely liberated, all the way? And he said, Mr. Davis said, Yogananda told him, not many. And he was just being nonchalant, matter of fact. Yogananda said, so many of them are caught up in this bliss of God communion, or sort of that attachment to God as the divine, good, beneficial aspect, that they don't go beyond it. They don't go beyond to the everything versus just this one idea of God. And so they stay there for a long time. He said millions of years, So yeah, there's the whole thing that you got to get through, which is, number one, your ideas about enlightenment. You need to address those, see if they're realistic. And it's okay if you have the ideas, because that sort of gets you going in the direction. But the key is to be able to, as you go, as you have experience, and as you get into it, and as you grow into your fullness of yourself, to let go of those things which are no longer true, instead of being fearful and holding to them, to let them go. So, the whole idea, really, everyone's got their thing that they enjoy, and whether it's a path or whether it's just being, whatever it might be. Because, you mentioned the being aspect, and I recently went to a talk just for fun to listen to see what the fellow had to say. And he was talking about just sitting there and being in the moment, right, as that's all you need to do. But really, that's just what we're doing in meditation. It's just that we don't, it's the same idea. It's a practice that one is doing. So it's a whole ripening process that brings us to that point of going beyond the mind to have that direct experience. And that's not something we can talk about, and it's not something a lot of individualized people want to go into, because it is scary. It is falling off the back of a cliff, and it's hard to embrace that for a lot of individuals. Individuals, I said, not the wholeness of life, but individuals.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Most of the people we interview on this program are yanis. You are a yogi, and you are expert in Vedic astrology and Ayurveda, and I don't even know what Jyotish is. And so this is an opportunity for myself and our listeners to learn a little bit about that. So I know a bit about conventional, say, astrology. Can you enlighten me as to the differences and attributes of Vedic astrology?
Sure.
Yeah.
And just so you know that Jyotish, Jyotish, that is Vedic astrology.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So that's the term for it. And if you go to India and you say astrology, they know it's Jyotish or Vedic astrology. And the main difference that I've seen, I've not studied Western astrology because I've always been interested in the Vedic aspect of things, is that Vedic astrology has quite a bit more technique, and it's looking at it from a level of layers of life. And so when we look at a person's chart, or when I look at a person's chart, what I'm looking at in my mind is their habits, their tendencies, their collections of thoughts and actions, which essentially is their karma. And so however long that they've been incarnated as an individualized person being, they have made choices and they have thought in certain ways which created this chart. And so all I'm looking at is the current state of consciousness as them. And to that end, if we can help to bring to light certain tendencies or thought patterns or behaviors that are leading them in a direction in this relative world that they don't want to go in, we can work with them to change that direction. And so again, it all goes back to that whole idea that we are already the infinite consciousness, and we have these things as individualized expressions we want to experience, and we just need to be honest and truthful with ourselves about how much we want to experience them. And then we can take actions to change that direction or change that course within this relative world. So Vedic astrology is really about bringing more awareness to their tendencies and their habits, and then providing ways to utilize that, or change it, or make it something that they want, in this life.
Cool. Now here's the part I don't get. If the chart itself is the data by which you're able to assess the karma and then the potential for changes in the person's life, without input from the individual, then you would have to say that the individual never had a choice in the first place, because the chart there lays it all out. So if they had no choice in the first place, are they going to have any choice after they come to a comprehension of how their karma has been playing out?
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm sorry that wasn't clear. Basically, they did have a choice. And so, what we see is that, for example, if Saturn is in, say, the 10th house of career, which can make them a little more lethargic and lazy and not real motivated to be productive in the world, that means, we would say, from a storyline point of view, that they have made those choices to remain lazy and unproductive for however many lifetimes they've been around, so more than likely it's going to happen again today. So it's just like if every day you wake up and have an egg for breakfast, I can pretty much predict that tomorrow you're going to have an egg for breakfast unless you decide that you want to have something different. So there is a choice, and the choices are from however long they've been around. So if they become aware of it now, then they can decide, okay, I want to experience something different. Because we have to remember that what we're interacting with is, for lack of a better word, a spiritual being, which is beyond karma, which is what the infinite is. And so if we can bring them into realization of that, then they can start to flex their muscles of the infinite consciousness to choose a different experience. So it's all choice. It's all choice from the Vedic astrological perspective.
I've often wondered about that question of, like, if we are in fact spirit being, a singular being that's multiplexing in form for the purpose of playing with itself in forgetfulness, right? Why would we ever want to foreshorten the game of cat and mouse if that's who we are and that's what we want to happen? It's like I've wondered, like, why attempt to wake myself or anyone else up out of this kind of stupor of misidentification when the very point of all this is to play with it?
Right. Well, you're using the right words there, which kind of answer that question, is the whole play idea of it. I mean, if someone is playing a game, do they enjoy the game more if they are aware of the fact that they are playing it, or do they enjoy the game more when they're so caught up in losing that they're tearing out their hair and they're just having a terrible time? What I found is that if you know you're playing the game, that makes the game a little more enjoyable. So that's sort of how I look at it. It's the idea of bringing in that sense of play. Because even in dramas, we watch dramas, as I mentioned before, because they attract our attention and whatnot. But if you get too caught up in it, that's when it becomes, I guess, for lack of a better word, detrimental. So really it's that whole idea of becoming aware of the play and then becoming a conscious, awake player. Like, for example, when someone approached the Buddha and asked him what he was, there's a story, someone came up and said, "What are you?" And he said, Are you enlightened? He said, "No." "Are you a master?" He said, "No." "Are you God?" And he said, "No." And he said, "Well, what are you?" Out of exasperation. And the Buddha just said, "Awake." So it's that whole idea of just the awake aspect of it.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I do, even though I do practice yoga because that's what I need, you mentioned that, for example, yoga and meditation, it does do things to the brain and the nervous system and the hormones in the body, which increases a person's joy within the world to a degree, as long as they're not attached to it. And so for me, that was something that I needed. But again, the whole idea of jnana yoga, that is my natural, that is where I flow to once that stability or that foundation has been developed. And so that's also why I do recommend yoga practices, because I find that once people do get that foundation, then they will naturally flow to the jnana, the knowledge aspect of it. I just wanted to throw that in there because it was on my mind.
I hear you.
Yeah, but anyway, go ahead. More astrological questions or other things?
Well, you bring a question up for me because you're realistic about the balance that ought to be present in someone's life in order for them to kind of be living in the flow. And you probably would think it's a little unrealistic to think that You don't have to attend to any of that at all in order to sort of be in the flow. Nobody's that sort of naturally centered that they can just do that. So, but here's the thing: I have these arguments with my ex significant other where, and be brutally honest with me, okay? Yeah. And then I have these also discussions with my spiritual mentor, and his take is like, just be yourself, and even if the model of behavior there doesn't look enlightened, like, for example, I yell at my kids and maybe I'll allow myself to get upset, knowing there's a witnessing going on there as I see myself getting upset. The difference between now and before is I see myself getting upset, right? Before I just got upset.
Yeah.
I didn't see myself get upset. Okay, so as I interact with this partner, this ex-partner of mine or whatever, we would have these arguments where I would say, I know that from your perspective, the fact that I still yell at the kids and, I display these behaviors that look unenlightened makes you think that I'm not relatively enlightened. You're wrong, because there's no correlation between my behaviors and the state of being awake. One can be awake, can one not? And yet display what looks to others like unenlightened behaviors. There is no model of behavior, right?
Oh, for sure. And that's, again, I wish I had written that book, Vedic Yoga, because then I could sell so many of them, but, which is an unenlightened thing, wanting to sell things, right? But anyway.
No, that's fine.
But anyway, in that book, there's so many stories in there to illustrate that point. And the thing that I love about it is that they talk about the gods and the demons, and there are demons that are enlightened. There are demons that are awake because they have their role to play in the world. Mm-hmm. And so, it brings around the sense that basically, being awake is not really dependent on behavior. However, behavior can influence a person's degree of awakeness or what have you, to a degree after to a certain point. But so the whole idea is that as long as you are being spontaneous, and as long as you are aware of what's happening and you are conscious, it may be appropriate to yell at someone, give someone the finger, beat someone up. It just may be appropriate in that moment. It may be appropriate to be nice to someone, to give them flowers, or to be a jerk. It just doesn't matter. It just depends on what is that level of awakeness within the moment. And the other thing, too, is that, the whole idea of renunciation, one of the reasons I love the Kriya Yoga path is Lahiri Mahasaya, one of the originating teachers. He would say renunciation isn't giving up everything. Renunciation is being renouncing everything internally, which means that you are established in yourself, and whatever happens in the world, you're not attached to. And he was considered an enlightened being and had 5 kids after he had his awakening experience and worked all day long, all these sorts of things. And, that leads to the state of you can't tell if someone's enlightened. And that's what I love. It just irritates me when I hear people talking about all these enlightened people to a degree because of how they act and whatnot. And, they don't go around with signs on their back. And usually the holy and the wise and the enlightened ones, they're not the ones that you would pick out anyway. So
exactly.
They're not that obvious.
That's right.
So it's an internal thing, and you can't really tell, because I've met some people who say the right things, but then you get quiet and you tune in, and it's just not quite right. You know what I mean? so it can't really, you can't judge someone by their outward behavior. That's the thing, and I agree with you there. You just can't judge people, period. But that's neither here nor there, and I'm probably preaching to the choir with that.
It's amazing how fast the time goes by with these things. We only have about 5 more minutes. Is there anything that you really feel called to talk about, or that you feel passionate about, or that's going on in your life, like right now, that you've learned something from, or anything you want to share right now that we haven't talked about?
Yeah. It's a good point. And this whole idea, this again, why I wanted to be on the radio show is because this idea of division between practice, people who meditate and get into that sort of a thing, and people who are into non-dualism and not practice, that's a false line, because everyone likes to do and needs something. And so it's really, what is it that allows a person to experience that inner state of fulfillment and joy and realization of the fullness of their being? And it may be different for everyone. And And so if we know what we need as individualized units to experience that, whether it's a particular path to commit to, whether it's just sitting in the woods being quiet, what I really like to encourage people to do is to honor that within themselves, because they are the infinite consciousness. Their personality is the infinite consciousness. Everything is the infinite consciousness. And we manifest here for a reason as supposed individuals. It's to experience our, quote, separateness within the wholeness. And so what I'd really like to say is just, I would like to encourage this letting go of the separation between practices and just being in the moment, because they both lead to the same spot. We're all going there one way or another. We're all realizing it one way or another. And the quicker we appreciate that within each of us, the quicker we realize that we are, all of us, doing our own thing in these seemingly separate ways. So then people can be happier and nicer to everyone and less judgmental.
Yes.
It's just my thought.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I would like to embody that.
Yeah.
It would please me if these sort of pointed tendencies were to dissolve away a bit. And I think that the balance that you've just described is the right approach.
Yeah. Well, we love you anyway. It's all good. It's all good.
It's funny how, though, some people are able to love you despite your egoic nature manifesting the way it does, and other people can't get through it. It's funny.
I think it kind of comes down to self-love, I mean, we all have crap in our past. We've all done things we don't approve of on some level, and it's once we realize that that's just consciousness, the story, doing its thing, the easier it is to sort of relax and be okay and realize that it's all working out. It's all working out.
Do you live in North Carolina?
Yeah, I live in Asheville.
Oh, you lucky dog. Yeah. If you've got some wonderful offerings on the web, how can people take your classes and check into your offerings?
Yeah, the best way is through, for at least the astrological aspect, is AshevilleVedicAstrology.com. So that's for astrological things. But my email's on there, which is Ryan@AshevilleVedicAstrology.com. I do have another website, which I just started. It's a lot of fun. It's Vasistas-yoga.com. And that has a calendar listing of like the meditation events and this event, and also being at the wonderful gathering, VASISTHAS-yoga.com. So those are the best ways to find me on the web, and that's about it.
Awesome. Are you going to do some guided yoga at the gathering?
Well, I know I'm scheduled to do at least one talk there on Wednesday. Again, when I do yoga, I don't do hatha yoga. My yoga is just meditation. So if people want to do, a meditation, that would be fine. But I actually don't do hatha yoga.
Well, I'm going to plan to hang with you for that. So.
Oh yeah, it'd be great. Then maybe you'll see my dark side.
Bring it on out. I'll honor your dark side. Well, it's been a great pleasure to hang out with you, Ryan.
It's been great to hang out with you, and I really appreciate the time. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a good one.